From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Voters go to the polls for primaries and runoffs in Virginia and Alabama as President Biden considers whether to call for a gas tax holiday. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Alicia Finley. Welcome to you both. There are elections today in a few places, but Kim, let's start in Virginia. What will you be watching there tonight as the results come in?
Republicans are very optimistic about a couple of centrist Democrats being able to pick them off. There are three races in particular. One of these already went ahead. It was the 10th district where Jennifer Wexlin is the Democratic incumbent there. They already had a race in May, chose a retired U.S. Navy captain named Hung Kao. He's Asian American in a district that is 70% of it is Asian American, and he is very much running on against education indoctrination, which has obviously been a big issue in Virginia. So that one was already done. Today are races in the 2nd district, which is where incumbent Elaine Luria sits. That's in the Virginia Beach area. And then also the 7th district, which is in Northern Virginia, and the incumbent there is Abigail Spanberger. In the 2nd district, Luria, there's a Navy veteran, State Senator Jen Kiggins, who's got a lot of support from groups aligned with Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy in the House and the NRA. The big matchup there was with another Navy veteran named Jerome Bell, who is backed more by some former Trump administration figures like Michael Flynn. We will see. Right now it looks as though Kiggins may win that race, and she would be well set up to give Luria a tough go of it. In the Spanberger race in the 7th, that is more fascinating. It's completely wide open. There are 6 candidates, and interestingly, each of them has support from a lot of different sitting Republican figures. State Senator Bryce Reeves, for instance, is supported by Senators Mike Lee and Marco Rubio. Prince William County Supervisor Yesley Vega is supported by Ted Cruz from Texas. And then there's Derek Anderson. He was one of the biggest fundraisers, and he's supported by Senator Tom Cotton. So it'll be interesting. But again, I think in both of these races, the GOP is likely to get candidates that have a really good shot at maybe picking up some seats for them in Virginia.
And just to give a couple thoughts on these general election races, I mean, remember Abigail Spanberger? She was the congresswoman who, after the 2020 elections, was on a caucus call with other Democrats and said, we need to not ever use the word socialist or socialism ever again. We lost good members because of that. And there was a few news cycles about this dissension in the Democratic House ranks. Elaine Luria is the only Democrat on the House January 6th committee who is in a swing district, and she said recently, if I don't get reelected because of this, that's okay. And so that provides a little bit of sense of who those people are and what kind of districts they're running in, if those are the things that they are saying. And these are both ranked as toss-up races by the Cook Political Report. So these are the kind of places that the Republicans are going to build their majority if they end up taking back the House in November. Moving on to Alabama, Alicia, what's your sense of the runoff happening there?
The runoff is between Mo Brooks and Katie Britt. Mo Brooks had actually received the Donald Trump's endorsement last summer, but Donald Trump pulled it after this spring, after some remarks by Brooks, essentially suggesting that it's time to move on from the 2020 election. Look forward to 2022 and 2024. Donald Trump, as he is wont to do, got vindictive, decided to pull his endorsement and accused Brooks of betraying him and betraying the Make America Great Again platform. What's interesting is Katie Britt is the former aide of the Congressman Richard Shelby, who was the chairman of the Banking Committee and an ally of Mitch McConnell, one of Donald Trump's supposed arch enemies. She's the front runner in this race. Former President Trump endorsed her a little over a week ago after it was pretty clear that she was going to be running away with it in the runoff. Again, just started to circle back. There was a primary in May, Republican primary. No candidate got over the 50% needed to avoid a runoff. Britt had got 44% versus Brooks was around 29%. Since then, she has expanded her lead, and Trump jumped in, as he's also sometimes want to do at the last moment, and threw his support behind the front runner here. And it looks like that she will run away with the race today. And in some ways, I think the Donald Trump endorsement or non-endorsements, I think, are being overplayed. I think there are some more, local issues and just personalities here at stake. And whether she is a little more or less, quote unquote, populist, less of a firebrand. She would probably, not to say that she's less conservative, but her personality is a little more subdued. And I think she would also be a much stronger general election candidate, given that, of course, Alabama is heavily Republican. But, there have been cases in which Republicans have even lost safe seats in the South. Doug Jones not long ago. And when you have poor candidates running. So I think this is probably, good news that she's, the front runner here and will probably win. But again, Donald Trump will probably claim vindication and victory, say that his endorsement helped her. But I think, she was already the clear front runner before he threw his weight behind her.
And one interesting aspect of this has been Mo Brooks's disillusionment with Donald Trump. He recently said, "It's quite clear that Donald Trump has no loyalty to anyone or anything but himself," unquote. And I think that Alicia's probably right that when Katie Britt wins, if that's what happens today, Donald Trump will say his endorsement made the difference, but he endorsed both of the candidates in the runoff at one point. So I suppose you have a pretty good endorsement record when you feel free to unendorse candidates who don't look like they're going to win. As to the point about Republicans being able to lose elections, even in what should look like safe states, let's talk about Missouri a little bit. And the primary there in Missouri is August 2nd. There's a Senate Republican primary. And one of the candidates, former Governor Eric Greitens, has made waves with a new ad that he's put out. Let's listen to this.
I'm Eric Greitens, Navy SEAL, and today we're going rhino hunting. The rhino feeds on corruption and is marked by the stripes of cowardice. Join the MAGA crew, get a rhino hunting permit. There's no bagging limit, no tagging limit, and it doesn't expire until we save our country.
So just to clarify, what you can't see in the audio is Eric Greitens talking about rhinos, which means Republican in name only. And he and a group of people in what look like combat fatigues are essentially doing a no-knock raid on what looks like a house, going in with weapons drawn. Kim, what do you make of this ad?
It's a bit disturbing. Look, just to be clear, American politics has a long history of politicians using firearms in campaign commercials, but most of them are usually designed to reassure people that they aren't opposed to firearms. So, I remember back in 2003, John Kerry went out on a photo op with a shotgun to shoot down some birds. They had the press corps in tow. It was to make people send the message that he wasn't opposed to the Second Amendment. Joe Manchin had a quite famous ad when he was running for the Senate for the first time in West Virginia in 2010, in which you see him loading a rifle and he shoots at a document that says the cap and trade bill. It was obviously the climate bill at the time, and the ad was called Dead Aim, and he said, "I'll take dead aim at the cap and trade bill." He was trying to send the message in a very conservative state that he was a more conservative Democrat. Some ads have even been kind of humorous too. This is very, very different. This is someone essentially saying, I don't even know, I guess, let's go take out rhinos with a lot of people armed with firearms. It's certainly a very violent message. And I think it's not just different in type, but also it comes at a very, I think, poor time to do something like that, in that, we only just had a couple of weeks ago a guy show up outside the house of Justice Brett Kavanaugh with the intention of killing him and his family. We've obviously had some political targeting of politicians, the congressional baseball game. It seemed like an ad that was in poor taste. If the message that I am not a rhino is what he wants to get across, there are a lot of ways of doing it that are not as aggressive as this. Now, of course, he's got everybody talking about it, but I think that's a different question about whether or not that ad will actually help him in the race.
But the incentives these days seem to be to do the wildest ad to get attention, and TV networks probably wouldn't run this ad, but in the internet age, who cares? You put out a web video and you make a splash. Interesting how the social media networks are treating this. Facebook has apparently removed the ad. Twitter has left it up, but it's flagged. It says that this tweet violated the rules about abusive behavior, but Twitter has determined that it may be in the public's interest for the tweet to remain accessible. And I don't doubt that Eric Greitens will now say that he's being censored by big tech. But the other thing, Alicia, that is so odd to me about this is that if you look at the polling, and there hasn't been a whole lot of it, but the polling that does exist shows that Eric Greitens is leading the field. There was a Hill Emerson poll that's dated June 5th, and it has Greitens up by 6 points. The Real Clear Politics average has Greitens up by 3.5 points. And so I don't quite understand why he would feel the need to make a splash like this, which could backfire, since he seems to be leading the field anyway.
Well, I'd agree that it could backfire, but I would also say that those margins are fairly slim, and especially when the allegations of domestic abuse and child abuse. I think he's trying to distract from those. Of course, these ads that are violent may just reinforce voters' concerns that he has poor judgment and temperament and shouldn't be elected. So, again, to reinforce your point that it very well may backfire. And if it does, it'll serve as a lesson for other Republicans, any politicians who are considering similar gambits.
And Alicia alludes to these, but there were also allegations against Eric Greitens that caused him to resign his governorship after he was elected. And so, Kim, I mean, all of that, there's a lot of baggage here, but do you think that if Greitens win the primary, that this could be one of those cases where Republican primary voters choose a candidate who has so much baggage that they can't win the general election?
One thing just to point out that I appreciate all those poll numbers, but there hasn't been a great deal of polling. And if you look at it, some of them, for instance, there was one from the Hill and Emerson College on June 8th. And yes, Greitens was winning. He was ahead of State Attorney General Eric Schmidt by about 6 points, ahead of Representative Vicky Hartzler by a little bit more than that, more like 10 points. But what was notable was that about 27% of voters said that they were undecided in the race. And we don't know what kind of internal polling the campaigns are doing. And there may be something in Greitens' polling they're turning up that is showing this a closer race than the polls might suggest, or might be finding that somebody is surging at the end and he may be nervous. So this could be a way of getting some attention. But this is one of those situations, I agree, Kyle, where this is a guy who just simply has a lot of baggage. He was forced to resign from the governorship. There are ongoing allegations against him. He has rejected them. But the reality is that even some investigations that were done in his own legislature at the time turned up some very unflattering things. And you know that whoever the Democratic candidate is going to just hammer him with those if he is indeed the nominee. And so, again, this is another one of those races, too, where there's more than just three people in this race. There's quite a few, and there's so many names. The guy who's got some of the biggest name recognition comes out on top, even though that could be a real problem for Republicans in a general election.
Hang tight. We'll be right back. You're listening to Potomac Watch from the Wall Street Journal.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. On Monday, President Biden said that he was considering calling for a gas tax holiday. He said he hopes to have a decision based on the data he was looking for by the end of the week. But there's not a clear consensus within his administration for this policy. And let's listen to Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm taking a contrary view on CNN with Dana Bash.
What's he waiting for on the gas tax?
Well, I mean, part of the challenge with the gas tax, of course, is that it funds the roads. And we just did a big infrastructure bill to help fund the roads. So if we remove the gas tax, that takes away the funding that was just passed by Congress to be able to do that. So, that's one of the challenges, but I'm not saying that that's off the table. That is, as prices continue to rise, that's certainly something the administration is considering, just like I know governors across the country are considering that.
Just to provide some context, the AAA average national gas price has slipped a little bit downward. It's under $5 a gallon, but not much. Today it's $4.97 a gallon nationwide. And the gas tax is 18.4 cents per gallon. Of course, there are state gas taxes generally on top of that, but Alicia, what do you make of this idea to save the public 18.4 cents a gallon here for a little while, at least while gas prices are high?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a reason why they haven't done it so far, and that's because, one, they don't think it'll make a big difference in terms of gas prices. 18.4 cents could be swamped by a $10 increase in the cost of crude. Second, they don't think they'll get, political credit for it, right? Because it could be swamped by the price. What they do want is to show that they're, using all the tools available to reduce gas prices. The Republicans' tax on the administration for its policies that have limited production and have refining capacity have hurt them. So they're trying to show that they're using all the available tools that they have at their disposal to help consumers. That included the Strategic National Petroleum Reserve releases earlier in the year and last year, which again haven't made a major difference. And this is another, I don't know, I would call it a ploy, but it definitely is a tool that isn't going to make a major difference to consumers and is just kind of papering over the problem. I get that, the arguments, we should just build the Keystone Pipeline. Well, that's not going to make an immediate difference either. That's correct. But long term, we have to remember that if you're actually reading some news stories nowadays that are predicting that these $120 barrel, price per barrel of crude is going to extend into next year and potentially even longer because of the mismatch between supply and demand. So this is going to be a long-term problem. We're going to need long-term solutions, not just short-term, political gimmicks.
But to the point about political credit, I think that might be part of it. If you take the 18 cents a gallon off, we're still talking about a national gas price of something like $4.79. I don't think that will have anybody doing cheers at the gas pump. The other sticky problem here, Kim, it seems to me, is that I think this would require congressional action. And do you think a suspension of the gas tax could get through this polarized Congress?
No, and that is the biggest problem. It would require federal action. And both Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, and Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, have both been very cool to the idea in the past. This has been brought up in the past before. Their members obviously passed this infrastructure bill last year. This is where the funding comes for many of those projects that are now in the works. A federal gas tax was the main source of revenue for that. And Democrats, too, are very aware that to then go down the road of having a holiday would undermine that bill, which is really, if you think about it, one of their only major achievements over the time that they have been in control. So I don't see a lot of interest, and that is probably why the White House said it was going to come up with an answer on whether it was going to go forward with this probably by the end of the week. But what that is actually about is taking time to talk to Congress to see if there's any way they could get anybody on board. It seems unlikely.
The other irony here, though, of course, is that the policies that Democrats have advocated for, like cap and trade, would increase fossil fuel costs. And we know that voters have rejected things like that when they are asked directly in referendum. But here we have another example of the Democratic line. Essentially, to my eye, it looks like give me high prices for fossil fuels, but not yet. And it is notable to keep that in mind when they, as soon as the gas prices start dropping again and they start talking about putting those mandates on, putting those cap and trade policies on, putting those carbon taxes on, what happens? How voters actually react when they see gas prices, the cost to heat their homes, the cost to cool their homes go up as much as they have in recent months. Finally, we have a letter from a listener here. Anne in Colorado is writing in on this question of oil prices. She says, the president can ban oil exports, and I believe that will solve the U.S. supply problem. I've heard this idea before. Why didn't you talk about it? The global oil shortfall is going to fall on other nations. And Alicia, I wondered if you could take that on. I mean, is banning oil exports a way that we would keep more supply in the U.S.?
Well, I think you need to recall that that crude exports were banned until about 2015 when Nancy Pelosi, Obama, and Paul Ryan formed an agreement to lift the crude export ban in return for an extension of renewable tax credits. The purpose of this was to provide an outlet for shale oil. A lot of U.S. refineries, especially in the Gulf, aren't well suited to process the shale oil. And so it was drastically pushing down prices. It was basically depressing prices for shale oil. By lifting the ban, that it's provided a global outlook for U.S. production, has actually encouraged more production. So what would happen if you were to actually to reimpose a ban on crude exports is that would discourage more production. Yes, there would be supposedly more crude that could be processed at U.S. refineries, but again, many of them can't or aren't well suited to do so. They'd have to invest in expensive upgrades, which would take time. So this actually isn't a silver bullet. This wouldn't, in long term, it would discourage more production in the United States.
Thank you, Alicia and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast app, and we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of Potomac Watch.